Good afternoon and welcome to today's installment of the Boost Your Skills webinar series, where we enlist the advice of specialist experts in order to help you make the most out of your university experience to help you succeed on and develop on a professional and personal level. I'm Siddharth, and joining me today is Jenny, and we are your Boost Your Skills team. This event is in webinar format, so you'll not be able to turn on your cameras and mics, but we would still love to hear from you through the chat function. This is a safe space with no judgments being passed, so please feel free to ask questions without fear or worry. If you are still anxious, feel free to message Jenny or myself anonymously and we will pass it on. In order to get the full experience of this workshop, please have a pen and paper handy. The session will be followed by some time for Q&A, so if you have any questions, send it into the chat box and we will attempt to get through all of them. The event is being live streamed to our YouTube channel, so don't worry if you've missed something. We'll be sharing a link to the video and slides after the event. And finally, a big thank you to all our attendees who pre-submitted questions. So now I'd like to hand over to Nicola from Oxford University Press.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Nicola Hartley and I'm a partnership consultant working at Oxford University Press. I was formerly senior commissioning editor at OUP, and I worked very, very closely with Sarah on this fantastic book. And for me and my colleagues at OUP, this is a really important publication. Important because the skills that you will learn from reading and engaging with this book will not only stand you in good stead for your studies, but crucially beyond. And that's why we chose to use that keyword in the subtitle for the text. I personally learned a lot from working with Sarah on this, and the tools in this book and some of the tools we'll talk through today have undoubtedly helped me become a better thinker, both professionally and personally. I really hope you experience the same. So today's session is a workshop. It will be interactive and practical and designed to walk you through a couple of the key tools explored in the book to give you some guidance and frameworks you can put to use immediately in your assignments and assessments. So leading the session today is our wonderful author, Dr. Sarah Ivory. Sarah is a senior lecturer and director of the Centre for Business, Climate Change and Sustainability at the University of Edinburgh Business School. She's a really passionate educator and has lectured undergraduate and postgraduate students for over a decade, and her passion shines through in this book. So I will now hand over to our wonderful host and author, Sarah, who will give you a little bit more information about what today's session will entail. So get yourselves comfortable and I really hope you enjoy this. Thank you for attending.
Oh, just finding my mute button, as we all need to do. Lovely to almost see you all, and I so wish we were all in the same room together, but it is nice to be in this virtual space with everyone too. I'm seeing already, and I look over to my other screen, some fantastic chat of everyone saying hello and from all the places you are from. Please keep that going. We love to see where everyone is from and what you're up to today. I am joining you from Edinburgh in Scotland, which is where I live and have lived for 15 years. The weather is beautiful, beautiful, bright, clear sunshine and also very freezing. So I have my shawl on today that I use at my desk. And I'm really excited about this workshop. And a workshop it is. This is not just me talking at you for an hour and a half. So first of all, it's going to be really useful if you have a pen and paper. Really, really useful. I can't recommend that enough. It is not for notes. You can type notes if you need to. This is for some exercises we're going to do. So please do get those now. So let's get started, as she says, trying to get this slides working. There we go. But before we do get started and talk about the actual book, I want to talk about engaging with this session. But actually, that is exactly to do with critical thinking. So let's think about what I mean. First of all, as I mentioned, I want you to grab a notepad and pen. That's because I'm going to give you some writing exercises, not note-taking exercises. That's different. Writing exercises, and I'll explain why that is important soon. Secondly, I want you to understand that this is the tip of the iceberg. Doing this 1.5 hour seminar will not make you a critical thinker. Reading my whole wonderful book will not make you a critical thinker. What will make you a critical thinker is learning some of the skills and tools and then enacting them in your workplace, in your university lectures, and in your personal life. If someone teaches you how to kick a ball, you're not a footballer necessarily until you get onto the pitch and play. And that is what you need to understand. What we're giving you here is tools, but becoming a critical thinker happens in social spaces or in classroom spaces, etc. However, this is the start of your journey. This is the start of your journey to thinking about thinking and then being a better thinker. And so I really want to thank you for your time you're spending here. But are you here? Are you actually with us 100% in this virtual space? We've got coming up to 100 attendees now, and I bet many of you have other things open. And what I'd like you to do is invite you to turn off all of your other distractions, your emails, your phone, your every other tab, and really give yourself the permission and the ability to focus on what we are doing in this short amount of time we're together. This really matters, not just out of respect for me, not just to make it easier for you, but if you want to become a critical thinker, you have to focus. And we're going to talk about that shortly as well. So please turn off everything else and focus on what we're doing. Oh, we're going to talk about that immediately. Why focus? Why am I telling you to do that? There's two reasons. There's a number of it. Here's two. This is an image from the book. Our brains are very suspicious things and they're very hard workers. They're thinking about hundreds of things at the same time. They are also scanning. So right now they might be scanning for a text message noise or scanning the bottom of your screen to see if an email's coming in. As soon as the little envelope comes in and you see it's an email, your brain is going to start processing all the different things it could be. You might be tempted to click on it and have a look and see if you need to deal with it now, and then decide you don't need to deal with it now. All of that is not multitasking. We use this phrase multitasking. It's not. It's task switching. And every time you switch between tasks, you lose a little bit of concentration, you lose a little bit of understanding, and you take a little bit more effort. So the best thing we can do for our brains, the best thing you can do to become a critical thinker before any of the other tools in this book is give your brain a chance. Switch off everything else and just focus on, this is from the reading chapter, so it's about what are the key messages in the article. But in this case, it's what are the key messages coming through in this hour. If you don't believe that, I highly recommend this book to you. It's by a computer scientist actually called Cal Newport, who is desperately worried about the fact that we are flitting between so many different spaces, virtual spaces, that we're actually losing the ability to work deeply. Not just not doing the work, but losing the ability for our brains to become immersed in something. It's a really scary idea that we're losing that ability. I remember back to my undergrad university, when it was exam time, I didn't work that hard during semester. So I had to study really hard at exam time. And I would go down to the lower floor of the basement of the University of Melbourne Library. I would go down to the back corner of that room where they were full of desks, and I would be there for 8 hours. Of course, I didn't have a mobile phone because I'm so old. It's back before mobile phones. And for 8 hours, I didn't have any contact with the outside world. All I did was revise, read, and work. When did you last spend just 2 hours without having 100 different things vying for attention? This book is really interesting and I recommend it to you. It's very well written. It will encourage you and help you on the pathway to becoming a deep thinker. So let's start with our first exercise to get everyone moving and get the blood pumping. And it's a signature exercise. So what I want you to do is take that piece of paper that you've got. Mine is here. And I want you to sign your name 3 times on that piece of paper. I'll do it with you now. So if you're like me, it'll look something like that. And you've signed your name 3 times. Now I want you to swap to the non-dominant hand. For me, it's my left hand. Swap your pen to the other hand and sign your name again 3 times. Okay, well, this is my attempt. I'm not sure if you can see it there. As you can see, terrible. And it took me a lot longer. What I want you to get out of this exercise is what I'm asking you to do here is to do things differently in the way that you approach your work and the way that you think. And that doesn't mean it's going to be easy. In fact, in the book, I don't have this in the slides, but in the book, I talk about this idea of productive struggle. It comes from a colleague of mine, Dr. Andrea English, and she talks about productive struggle. We want it to be hard, to be not easy, because that's how we develop. If I kept signing my name with my left hand every day for an hour for the next 12 weeks, by the end, I'd be much better at it. You have about a 12-week university semester. If you spent all that time practicing every hour for a day, critical thinking, by the end, you'd be much better at it. But you're not going to be any good at the start necessarily. Remember that picture of the pathway. This is a journey, and you have to commit yourself to being on that journey. So how did all of this start and end up with a girl from rural Victoria in Australia writing a book for Oxford University Press? I'm going to tell a bit of a story because I hope that it will help you see why this book has been written and therefore whether it will be useful for you on your journey. I have been teaching at the University of Edinburgh Business School for 15 years. And until about 6 years ago, mostly I taught postgraduates, and I've mostly taught elective courses in climate change and sustainability. So most of the students there were older because they were in postgraduate, and they wanted to be there with me because they were paying money to do a master's program or a PhD program. About 6 years ago, the dean of the business school said, Sarah, could you rethink our first year offering to undergraduates? Design something that you think will inspire and engage them and give them the skills they need to succeed in our programs. Here at Scotland, our undergraduate programs are 4 years long. So there's 4 years ahead of them. And how do you think they need to approach that? And I had a great fun doing it. And I set up a course called Global Challenges for Business. And it was all about the challenges business will face. So inspiring students to be interested in what business is, why it exists, etc. And I included some critical thinking skills in that course because I thought they were essential to how we study and tackle business and how we act as business people after university. It did not go well. So in that first semester, at the very start, I couldn't get students to engage. I couldn't get them to answer my questions. I couldn't get my students to really immerse themselves in what we were doing. And I couldn't work out why. And so I did the thing you meant to do. I asked them. And I learned a lot in that semester. And the thing is, most of those students had come from school. And at school, most of them, and they were pretty smart, they'd got good marks. You know, you get into University of Edinburgh with some pretty good marks. And most of them thought that being smart was about learning what the lecturer or teacher was telling you, repeating it in an exam, and showing that you were good at that. So that kind of learn and repeat mentality. There was also cultural aspects to that. Some people from different cultures felt that that was their job. That's what university was for. And what I was most worried about is that that is absolutely not what university is for. That does happen. You have to learn some stuff, and I'll talk about that in this seminar, in this workshop. But that's not what it's for. And I started trying to explain to students that they were there to become critical thinkers. And students said to me, how do you become a critical thinker? And my answer was, you've got to think more critically, which is a terrible answer for students who A, don't really know what it is, and B, that doesn't tell you anything, right? So I started looking into it. I started researching. I first tried to find a book that would help my students. I couldn't find a book that was appropriate. And so then I started writing things for them, writing what became draft book chapters. I started researching other texts and summarizing or synthesizing or putting things together to help my students understand. Oxford University Press heard, they got onto me, and here we are now. I hope that story helps you understand where this has come from. And if you kind of resonate with that, it helps you think about whether it can be useful to help you at university. If you want to learn more about the book, here is the 3 parts, 3 simple parts. What is a critical thinker and why become one? Understanding the 3 aims of critical thinking and mastering the 5 tools of critical thinking. Today, we're going to do workshop work on 3 of these. Oh, I've lost it again. We're going to do a writing workshop, a brief reading workshop, and a quality of argument workshop. And that'll be our focus today, on developing quality arguments. That's normally where people kind of want to focus on their skills. Before that, we're going to talk about part 1, which is really, really important. I want to say that if you have any questions about any of these topics or anything else, either put them in the chat now, or we'll have an extended time for questions at the end. Feel free to put them in the chat now, though, and the team behind the webinar will turn on their microphone and ask me those questions to make sure I've seen them, because it's over on my other screen. Let's have a look at part 1. Read those chapter titles for me. Why go to university? What is critical thinking? How to become a critical thinker at university. Oxford Uni Press's process means that this book went out to review before it was published to a lot of different people, students, lecturers, etc. And I had one academic push back and suggest that we didn't need part 1 of the book, or certainly we didn't need chapter 1. And the argument was, students are already at university when they've bought this book. They don't need to know why to go. I could not disagree more with this. And if we had time, as is in part 1 of the book, we would explore the different reasons why people go to university, and there are lots of them. And you can have a look at part 1 and chapter 1, and it'll talk about different types of reasons for going to university. And you can think about your reasons. None of them are right, none of them are wrong. They're your reasons. But thinking about what university has to offer in advance of doing your degree is the perfect time to be getting the most out of your degree. And what breaks my heart is when we hear final year students say, I wish I'd known in first year that, ... Well, this is a chance to help students at the start of a degree to know. It's also, may I suggest, a chance for people doing a postgraduate degree to think about why they're there as well. Often that's a lot shorter, maybe just a year. And again, often it's important to think about why you are there and what you are going to get out of the program. So, the purpose of university. But let me start by thinking about your tutor or lecturer. I have a lot of sympathy for tutors and lecturers. I am one. I'm on strike today. We're going to hear about that a bit later because of the conditions that we are under. We'll talk about that, and I'll be welcoming your views on the chat. We have a lot to do in a short amount of time, a lot that I need to teach you in the 12 weeks that I'm with you. So consider a swim coach. A swim coach stands next to the pool and helps the swimmers learn how to dive, the strokes that they need to do, how to turn at the end of the lane and swim back, the tactics of whether to go fast at the start or start slower. The swim coach has got a lot to do. Let's say a swim coach notices that one of their swimmers, the problem is they're not strong enough. They haven't got enough muscle mass to be a good swimmer. And the swim coach says to that swimmer, I need you to build your muscle mass. I need you to get stronger. And the swimmer says, great, how do I do that? And the lecturer says, the swim coach, the lecturer in this analogy, says, well, to get stronger, I lift weights, but I'm not sure exactly that I can explain to you how I do that or what you need to do. You need to go and find someone else. And anyway, I'm too busy training the swimmers to help you with this other thing. This other thing, being strong, is essential to succeeding, but I don't have the time or maybe the expertise to teach you in it. That analogy works for critical thinking for many tutors and lecturers. Either they don't have the time to be able to teach you critical thinking skills explicitly because they've got so much else to teach you. They need to teach you the anatomy of the body in medicine. They need to teach you techniques of studying ancient civilizations in sociology, anthropology probably. But it's also possible that your tutor or lecturer doesn't have the skills to teach you critical thinking. And I want to tell you how I know this. I know this because I did not have the skills to teach you critical thinking lecturing. When that first semester happened and my student says, what do? I didn't know what to answer. I did a lot of research in order to write this book to work out how to teach it. So I want you to give your tutors and lecturers a break, and I want you to think about using another resource like this book to make your work much better, to make you a better critical thinker, a better swimmer, even though the swim coach can't teach you how to lift weights. So let's think about before and after university. Before university, you're at that top line. Here's what you know, here you are, and here's what you think there is to know. Hopefully after university, you've moved forward a bit. On graduation, hopefully you know more stuff. But now you realize there's so much more to know. There's a whole world out there you hadn't thought about. Not only that, but there's new knowledge coming all the time. If you go to a doctor, you don't want them to diagnose you based on what they learned at medical school 20 years ago. You want to be confident that they are adding to their knowledge all the time. And this image was a way I try to communicate in the book about the problem of treating university like a place to learn stuff and repeat it for two reasons. One is, and we'll come to this, there's not much you can do with that stuff if all you do is know it and you can't use it. But more importantly, you've got a whole world ahead of you. A university graduate is a special thing. It's still very much a minority around the world, even though you might not feel that. You are able to do something during your university degree to become a different person, a better thinker. But in order to do that, you have to engage with your studies in a different way. Remember that signature exercise? You have to do things differently, and that might mean doing things in a way that feels worse to start with. So let's think about then, if it's not just about learning stuff, what is it? I explain this as the three elements of university education. There is foundational knowledge. You've got to know things. If you're a doctor, you've got to know anatomy. If you want to be an accountant, you've got to know profit and loss statements. There'll be a similar thing for your discipline. But alone, it's useless until you add, for example, universal skills. And then we know how to do things with the things that we know. One of the universal skills I would suggest to you is critical thinking, but there are others: digital skills, team working skills, creative thinking, sometimes as if not more important than critical thinking. My book is about one of those skills, critical thinking. Even then, I still don't think that's all university is for, until you add that final aspect of personal characteristics. And what I mean by that is confidence, self-esteem, empathy, cultural awareness. University is about adding all of these things together, so at the end you are able to do things with the things that you know. And that is critical thinking. Let's think again about critical thinking in relation to three personas, and I call them a follower, a cynic, and a healthy skeptic. Consider a follower. Blindly accepts all arguments, ignores reasoning and assuming evidence presented is reliable. Consider a cynic, rejects all arguments, assumes all reasoning is flawed and all evidence presented is biased or false. Hopefully you're picturing those personas in your mind, and perhaps you know some people who kind of fit those. And in the middle, we have a healthy skeptic. Actively assess arguments and reasoning based on reasoning and evidence based on reliability. So we'll be working on quality arguments today on reasoning. We won't have time to work on strength of evidence based on reliability, but there is a whole chapter in the book. So where a follower will praise anything and a cynic will find fault with everything, a healthy skeptic engages in critical thinking. And that's what you are. It doesn't mean you believe everything all the time, and it doesn't mean you don't believe anything ever. It means you make judgments about when to believe something and when not to. Another analogy, when you get to know me, you'll see I love analogies. I want you to think about learning to drive a car. This analogy comes from the reading I was doing to try and write my book. And a lot of the reading had deep philosophy on critical thinking. And if you've done critical thinking stuff before, you'll know that there's a lot of Aristotle, a lot of logical proofs. If A, then B. And that's fine. And if you're into that and you want to go into that depth, that's fine. But if you're learning to drive a car, the first thing you do isn't lift the hood to work out how the engine works. You don't really need to know how the carburetor works or what the differential is. You just need to be able to sit in the driver's seat and know the key things to use the car for what you want it to do, to go from A to B. If you want to be a Formula One driver, fine, you need to understand a lot more. But if all you want to do is go from A to B, that is, be a critical thinker in your daily life, you just need to know the key aspects. And that analogy led me to simplify the way in which we teach critical thinking in the book. And I simplified it by doing this. Well, first, I'll show you how it's not that I didn't simplify it, but I wrote a definition. You always need a definition, and here is mine, concocted from a lot of different good thinkers. Critical thinking is a cognitive process, a brain process, of actively and carefully evaluating the reasoning and evidence behind knowledge and arguments, and developing defensible knowledge and arguments ourselves. Now, I stand behind that definition. It's accurate, it's good, and it's comprehensive, but it's not very useful. It's not very useful to you, a university student, trying to work out what to do in class tomorrow. So I simplified it. Like driving a car, here's what you need to know. There are three aims of critical thinking: quality of argument, strength of evidence, and clarity of communication. You can picture them in a triangle. Now, clarity of communication, for those of you who are pedants on this, is not a thinking aim necessarily. It's a communication aim. However, if you want to become a critical thinking, you need to be able to communicate in order to take critique, in order to improve. And by critique, I mean self-critique as well as critique from others. And so that's why clarity of communication is there. Again, we don't have time today to look at strength of evidence or clarity of communication, but I really encourage you to look at those in the book if you're interested in them. But before we come to quality of argument, which we're going to work on, I want to give you a couple of tools, practice with some tools. Checking my timing here, we're going really well. I want you to practice a couple of tools. So I had understood what I was going to write for part 1 and for part 2. But you could still say to me, if I said the aim of critical thinking is quality of argument, strength of evidence, and clarity of communication, you could still say to me, yeah, but what do I do? What do I do in class? What do I do tomorrow? What do I do when I'm sitting in the library? It doesn't actually tell me what to do. And I thought about that for a long time, did a lot of reading, and I simplified all of the advice, I hope, into 5 tools of critical thinking. But beyond that, I also categorize them. And I think this really helps students to think about what university is for. So let's look at the categories first before we look at the tools. The first category of these tools is time sensitivity. So that's the immediacy of the tool. Is it used on the spot right now? Or can you use it at your own pace, fast or slow, depending on what you decide? The second category is voice. Whose voice is being expressed when we use that tool? So are we engaging with someone else's voice, or are we expressing our own voice? So let's have a look at that in our matrix. Let's start with others' voice, that column. If we're engaging with others' voice in a time-insensitive manner, that is when we are reading. So you read your articles, you read your textbooks, you can take your time over them. You're listening to the voice of someone else, the author, and you can take your time. You can flick back if you don't understand. You can go to a dictionary if you need to. If we are engaging in others' voice in a time-sensitive manner, we are listening. So right now, you're listening to my voice about a topic. The topic is critical thinking. Yes, we do have recordings. This is being recorded. Some people might be watching this as a recording, and that means you can go back and listen to it again, which is great, and that's a great innovation in learning. But there will always be times, either in your university career or in your career beyond, where you will have to listen in a time-sensitive manner. That means on the spot. One example is a job interview. If you're in a job interview and they ask you a question, you can't ask for it to be repeated 7 times. You can't replay it. So practicing that tool of listening to others' voices on the spot is really important. You'll notice thinking is in the middle. Thinking is a tool all on itself, of its own, and it's got its own chapter in my book. But the reason it is in the middle is because you have to read and think. You have to listen and think. And you'll see those in a moment. Let's move on to our own voice. Why? Because this is my big concern about university students today. You do not have enough of a chance, or you do not take the chance to express your own voice. You spend too much time just reading and listening, and not enough time writing, I'll talk about that in a moment, and speaking, crucially speaking. So writing is where we are expressing our own voice in a time-insensitive manner. We're going to practice that soon. And I'm going to talk about that in more detail soon. So let me go to speaking. Speaking is when we express our own voice in a time-sensitive manner. Unfortunately, in this seminar environment, you can't practice speaking. However, you can in tutorials, you can in lectures, you can in group work. Speaking is an essential skill, but it is also an essential tool to thinking. There's a cool phrase, which is, how do I know what I think until I hear what I say? And one of my concerns is that students go to university and they feel like they should only speak once they have the answer, once they're confident in the answer. Instead of speaking to voice ideas, to try them out, to decide whether they work or don't, whether there's a strong argument behind them or not. Sadly, we can't go into speaking today, but it's my favorite chapter in the whole book, possibly with listening as well. So I really encourage you, if you're interested in those 2 skills and tools to thinking, then to get hold of the book and to practice the exercises there. So let's move on then to writing. And let's think about your approach to writing. I want you to consider that there are 2 different types of writing. The first one is thinking to write. That is when you do your thinking first and then your writing second. We call that representational writing, or the audience is others. So for example, if you have an essay that you need to write, that is representational writing, that is thinking to write. That's not what I'm talking about here. I'm not interested in this tool in your essays you're writing. That's an output. I'm interested in writing to think. That is writing as an input to thinking, not an output. This is what we call exploratory writing. You're trying to develop thoughts, spark inquiry, and the only audience is yourself. So this is using writing as a tool to work out what you think, to work out what your argument is, not as an essay tool. There are a couple of things that make this very difficult for students. I talk about this in detail, but I wanted to mention them now. There are three different personas you can take on when you do writing. There's the writer, there's the critic, and there's the copy editor. Let's deal with the last one first. The copy editor is the person who fixes grammar, who looks for spelling problems, maybe who looks at structure of paragraphs, etc. Oxford University Press got me a copy editor for this book. Hopefully it was okay once they got it, but they picked up on those things. At this stage, we're not interested in the copy editor at all. That's a job for your essays. That's something you should do. But right now, we only want to focus on two other personas when we're writing to think, the writer and the critic. And the key thing with your approach to writing is that you should not be both people at the same time. What do I mean by that? Most students and most academics are really critical of our own work. We think we're not good enough. I think that all the time in my writing. So I go to write something and I don't write it down because the critic in my head says that's not good enough yet. That is a real problem. You get good by writing. And if you let that critic speak to you, if you let that critic hold your pen or hold your fingers from typing, you will never get good at critical thinking by using writing as a tool. So we separate the two. Sometimes you're a writer and sometimes you're a critic. First, you do writing. You literally vomit ideas onto your page. You just say whatever is in your mind, whether it's good, bad, relevant, irrelevant, you just put it down. Then you pick it up and then the writer goes and has a break. And the critic in you picks it up and reads it and sees whether it's any good and sees what you think. This is how I do my writing. This is how I want all my students, and you are now my students, to do your writing. It helps you to think. If you pick up that piece of paper and you see that you don't agree with what you've just said, that is a success. Why? Because you're learning, you're developing, you're improving. So oftentimes at university, we only write when we're under pressure because of a deadline or when we feel like we have the answer. I want you to write to work out the answer or an answer or an idea or to dismiss an idea. So big deep breath. We're going to do a writing exercise. I would really encourage you to do this with a pen and paper. If you want to do a typing exercise, that's fine, but pen and paper is better. So I want you, I'm just trying to get mine from under my book. I want you to write an answer to this question, and I'm going to time us, and we're going to have 2 minutes. So I want you to write your thoughts, anything on this question. As soon as it comes up, I'll say go, and we'll time ourselves for 2 minutes, and then I'm going to ask you to share some ideas in the chat, but wait until the end of 2 minutes to do that. Right now, pen in hand, are you ready? We're going to have silence. You'll watch me doing writing as well, and let's go. The question is, why is critical thinking important at university? Just write. Go. Okay. Oh, gosh, I dropped the phone. So let's come back, finish off the last thought you were writing. You'll see here a paragraph that I wrote. I got a bit stuck in the middle, and I'll tell you why I got stuck, given I've written a book about this topic, because I was looking to see how much longer we had left, because that was my job, okay, to time. So my brain was distracted and I couldn't immerse myself in the exercise. So I see some of you have written in the chat on this. What I want is not the answer. I see some of you have written that. That's great. What I want you to write down now from as many people as possible is how you felt in doing that exercise. Was it easy or hard? And if it was hard, what made it hard? Really be reflective here. And I'm going to have a look and wait to see what made it easy or hard. Apologies for looking over here at my other screen. It felt freeing, and Helen, we want to hear more from you. It looks like you've got good ideas. Help to understand and help not to have negative or limiting beliefs. Yes, thank you. Find the time constraint hard. Yeah, time sensitivity, Sarah. Next time, free yourself. Give yourself as much time as you want. Someone said longest 2 minutes ever. Beverly, I hope you practice. Not so easy as it was a diverse opinion. I would argue, Kene, that having a diverse opinion makes it easier, because then you can write arguments on both sides. We'll talk about arguments. Quite easy, actually. Was able to write down my thoughts, and it felt nice to do it in a free way. Hardest part was my hand cramping. We don't practice writing anymore, people, because we type too much. Felt easy to pick up the pen and just write. Brain to download it. Difficult because it popped out suddenly, and critical thinking is I'm weak at. Well, I'm glad that you gave it a try as well. Easier when you don't critique yourself too much. Please, there are two people in your head, the writer and the critic. They're never allowed in the same room. They're very important people to you, both of them, but never in the same room. Starting is the hardest, but once the words began to flow, the snowball began an avalanche. I love that. Fantastic. Hard but thought-provoking. Can I suggest, Janatul, that you should have written hard and thought-provoking. Thought-provoking is a good thing, and so is hard. You got political quickly, did you, Marguerite? Okay, that's good. These are such good things I hope everyone's reading some of these things. It is brainstorming. Bola, I'm not sure if it's brainstorming per se. It depends on your definition of brainstorming. I think of it as downloading anything from your brain. I guess that is brainstorming. Yeah, I guess that is. I hadn't thought of it like that. Yeah, I like that actually, now that I think about that. Very rewarding, very freeing. Organizing thoughts was a challenge. Well, Sarah, that wasn't your job. Your job was just throw them on the page. Stop putting the critic in your head. You only had 2 minutes. That's not enough time for a writer and a critic. People saying they found organizing thoughts challenging too. I've got a lot of exercises like this in the book, a lot of them, and the people who get the most out of this book are the ones who do the exercises. The years of pedagogy, which means training in how people learn, has contributed to that sort of thing. I want to give you, I'm loving that I'm seeing more stuff coming, but we need to move on. I want to give you one story about why I've given you this writing exercise right now. When I started teaching my tutorials for my course, so this course had 350 students in it, huge lecture hall. We also had tutorials, and I took some of the tutorials. Obviously, I couldn't take them all, of about less than 20 students. And at the end of every tutorial, I gave 10 minutes, sometimes only 5 minutes, but I always did this. We put a question up on the board, and I said to everyone, just write. I'm not going to read it. I'm not going to think about it. I just want you to write. And that does two things. First of all, it cements what you've heard. Okay, so this exercise now means that you've thought more actively about everything that I've said in the last 45 minutes. However, it also helps your brain do an exercise of putting things into buckets. So some of you have said here that you found it challenging to organize. That's fine, because 2 minutes isn't enough time for your brain to organize stuff. But I would suggest to you that you'll come back tomorrow or the next day, and you'll be able to think more clearly about critical thinking and about your views because you gave your brain a chance to realize what wasn't yet organized. So here's something that I am suggesting you do. Here's what I wrote about critical thinking, and I want you to consider ripping it up. How many of you are willing to do that? If you were typing it, hit delete, delete the file. Now, some of you will be scared. You'll be saying, no, but I wrote important stuff down. The point of the exercise was not writing as an output, a piece of paper with stuff written on it. It was writing as an input to help your brain to think about stuff, to help your brain to organize things, to work out what it now knows and what it doesn't know yet. And when I talk about organizing things, don't worry, that's the whole second half of the workshop, quality of argument. All we're going to be doing is organizing thoughts. So let's move on now. Nicola's saying I've got other notes from the session on the reverse page. Don't delete that if you've got important notes. Don't rip that up. Okay, let's move on. So we're back to our 5 tools, and I'm going to talk about reading as a tool now because it's something you do so much of at university, and so often you don't do it well, and it is not your fault. And it's so easy to do well that I want to teach you how. So this part of the session does not have an exercise involved per se, but I hope you'll find it interesting. Let's say you've got a reading list of 9 readings for your course, and you have to do them all by next week. How are you going to do it? Let's see from a chat. How are you going to tackle that? How are you going to tackle, forget the words breadth and depth right now. Don't worry about that. That's coming later. You've got 9 readings. How are you going to tackle it for next week? I'm looking over to my chat to see if anyone can give us some ideas. 9 readings. What are you going to do? My brain would explode. Helen, it says prioritize. Good. Others? What are you going to do? 9 readings. Plan time, dividing the total pages per day, scan through them, essential ones first, read the shorter ones first. I like your honesty. Start with the harder ones. I like that as well. Read the one I like the look of. That's so true. Time planning as well. Great. Let's see more comments come through. You can read them while I come back to you. I'm going to suggest to you a reading plan, okay, that will help. This is not the reading plan I'm going to suggest, but it's something a lot of people think you have to do at university. So think about a bay. Can you see there under our grid that we've got a bay? And imagine you're a scallop diver. So you're going to go and try and find scallops in the bay for dinner. How are you going to tackle that? You're going to set a grid, perhaps like this one, and then you're going to dive down in square 1 and see if there's any scallops. Then you're going to dive down in square 2 and see if there's any scallops. Then you're going to dive down in square 3 and see if there's any scallops, and so on and so on. So you've understood 3 readings in depth. You've got the breadth of that reading and the depth of that reading. But let's say you then run out of time, or you run out of energy, or something happens in your life that means that you were only able to get to 3, a third of the squares that you need to look into to try and find your dinner. You may come up with nothing. You might have found those readings weren't useful. You didn't understand them. One was too hard for you. One was too easy for you. A hard reading, like too hard, is useless if you don't understand it. An easy reading is useless because you already know it. So a linear reading strategy can be very problematic, especially without the time and energy constraints. So here's an alternative. I call it an active reading strategy. And in the book, I talk about a context, breadth, depth reading strategy. It's explained in much more detail, but basically it means this. Here's the bay. You've got your 9 squares that you know you need to look at to find out if you've got scallops. But instead of diving down all the way to the bottom to see if there's scallops, you swim the grid and you put your head underneath. And from the top, you have a look at what looks like is in each square. So you skim, literally the water, for you, it's skimming the reading. And then you choose the ones that you think will be most valuable to you. So you've got the breadth of all of the readings, 9 of them, and you've got the depth of some of them. Oh, I've ticked 4 there instead of 3. It doesn't matter. Maybe you go into depth on all of them. That's great. Okay. If you've got time, if you've got energy, absolutely fantastic. This is what I'm suggesting to you, not only because of time management and because so often students don't get to all the readings, but because you'll get more out of all of the readings. By understanding all 9 from a broad perspective, you know what you're looking for in the depth readings. You get a whole sense of the whole topic of that week or of that course. And then when you're digging down into the reading that you're going to read in depth, you understand it better instead of reading one in depth and having it not make sense. Think also, if number 1 was a really hard reading, you might give up. You might say, well, I don't get that, so I'm not going to understand this week. And that happens all the time. We all give up when something looks too hard. This is, again, the idea of the productive struggle, which I talk about at the start. So I want to recommend that reading strategy to you. But before we move on, checking my time again, I want to talk about why do the reading at all. This is something in the book I talk about, education progression. In primary school, we're learning to read. C-A-T spells cat. In secondary school, we're reading to know. I know the answer because I read it in a book. Of course, there's a star there because in the textbook, I say you never actually know the answer, but that's by the by. Read the book and you'll see why that star is there next to that. In tertiary education, university education, you're reading to think. Based on the sources I read, I can discuss and debate these ideas. I can think for myself. Remember our tools. I can share my own voice. Here's our tools again. Based on what I read, I can then write or speak in my own voice, come up with my own ideas. So reading should be helping with your writing and speaking, but also it helps with listening as a tool. Why? Often as a lecturer, we'll set pre-readings, and sometimes you'll do them and sometimes you won't. One reason to do them is that when you then get into the lecture theatre or into the tutorial and you're listening to the topics that were in the pre-readings, you don't have to listen to understand the idea. You can listen to think about whether you agree with it or not, what other ideas come to you, how it links to other topics. If it's the first time you've heard of that idea, you're just scrambling to get what they're saying. If it's the second or third time, because you've done the reading, in that lecture theatre, you can think more, not just listen to remember or listen to work out what's being said, but to think. So pre-readings are absolutely essential for that purpose. So back to this. So this is the main skill. I hope you've already got some skills from today, but this is the main skill we're going to look at today. So for everyone, have a little stretch. I'm going to do it myself because we've been sitting down for a while. If we were in a room together, I'd make you all stand up and have a stretch. So if you need that, feel free. And we're about to focus on the quality of argument. And I've got some time to explain what that is and then some time for questions as well afterwards. And you're going to practice some arguments yourself. So sit down again, take a big deep breath, and let's think about the components of an argument. So an argument is not arguing. They're completely different things. Arguing is when you are having a disagreement or a fight. You're arguing with your parents, you're arguing with your friends, you're arguing with your partner. For me, you're arguing with your kids, right? Making an argument is different. It's presenting a claim or a position and supporting with premises, or that's another word for reasons, and sometimes evidence. It's got 3 elements: a claim, premises, which is another word for reasons, and a link in the middle. And with all of the complication that I'm about to talk about, it's as simple as that. So for example, my husband is an avid rugby fan, I am also, and ahead of the 2019 World Cup in Japan, He said to me, before I tell you what he said, for those of you who don't know much about rugby, you have to understand that the Scottish rugby team, while very good, is unlikely to win the World Cup, okay, of rugby. There, I've said it. But my husband believes every World Cup that they've got a really good chance. And he said to me, Scotland have a good chance of winning the 2019 Rugby World Cup. And then he said, because since the last World Cup, they've beaten many of the best teams, and he listed them. They've got a good squad, including some world-class players, and he listed them. And the new coach is innovative and has been successful in the past. He was making an argument in order to be persuasive. He made a claim and he linked it using the word because to 3 premises or 3 reasons. That is all quality of argument is trying to do. But we can get much better and better at that as we go. And there's a lot more flesh, if you like, in the chapter on how. But let's think about it then. Is this an argument? Scotland will win the Rugby World Cup because I eat eggs for breakfast. What do you think? Is that an argument? So, in your mind, I want you to think about your answer. It's got a claim. Oh, a lot of people saying no. Okay, good. Good, but it's got a claim, it's got a link, and it's got a premise or a reason. Therefore, this is an argument. It's just a bad argument. Not all arguments are good. Not all arguments, premises, supporting claims make sense. Politicians make bad arguments all the time. So do my kids when they're trying to convince me why they should get something. This is what we call a logical inconsistency. There's no logical reason why what I eat for breakfast will help Scotland win the World Cup. You might be able to say that what the Scottish team eat for breakfast might link, but even then that would be tenuous. Again, the chapter on quality of argument really explores that as well. So how do we create a quality argument ourselves? A tool I'd like to suggest that you might like to use, and we're going to practice with today, is called argument maps. And these are simply box and arrow diagrams. You've got a simple one on the left there and a more complicated one on the right. Again, the chapter walks you through this, but I'm going to do that a little bit now. Here's an example of how we take that claim that my husband made and turn it into an argument map. The claim at the top in the triangle is that Scotland has a good chance of winning the Rugby World Cup. The arrows become the links. So one way you would use the word therefore, and the other way because, depends which way your argument goes. Let's have a look at that. Since the last World Cup, they've beaten many of the best teams. Therefore, that's the way we're going, Scotland has a good chance of winning the World Cup. Of course, you'd use because if you were saying Scotland has a good chance of winning the World Cup because since the World Cup, they've beaten many of the best teams. And then you would put your 2 other premises here. And that's it. That's an argument. That's an argument map. However, writing these is hard work. And I say, I think in the book somewhere, that you haven't really developed a complex argument until your page looks like a cat has vomited triangles and arrows. I'm going to go through 2 more arguments briefly about rugby again, apologies, before we're going to practice our own. So I did some work with a rugby club once, and that's why I have these. And the argument, the claim that I wanted them to work out how to support was that critical thinking is a key trait of elite rugby players. Now, are you persuaded by that? Do you believe that? Would you have thought, rugby players, they'll be critical thinkers? Maybe you wouldn't, but maybe I can persuade you with my logical argument, and here it is. Modern elite rugby comprises extensive study of our own and our opponents' strengths, weaknesses, and tactics. Oops, wrong way. Therefore, elite rugby players are expected to engage in this study, which comprises elements of critical thinking. Therefore, critical thinking is a key trait of elite rugby players. That's my argument. Here's another one. Clubs, rugby clubs, want to develop their players' wider skills and abilities beyond just rugby. Therefore, clubs develop programs which comprise critical thinking training. Therefore, critical thinking is a key trait of elite rugby players. Now, you don't have to agree with me. You don't have to be persuaded. But what I hope you are is, what I hope you have seen is the logical flow of my argument. I'll do another quick one. Let's start in the other direction. Let's start without the claim. Let's say you're on a rugby pitch and you're playing a game and you realise the original game plan was based on dry weather and it's not working in the rain. And you realise that we're down 20 points with 20 minutes to go. Therefore, with the original game plan, we've got no chance of winning. Maybe you also realise that you're being penalised at the breakdown, that's a part of the rugby game, due to a refereeing interpretation. Oops. Therefore, our current tactics will continue to incur penalties. So then you decide that therefore, our original plan needs to change. And that's an example of an on-field critical thinking exercise. Now, rugby players aren't on the field with their triangles, etc. But as you get better at critical thinking in your own context, you do this without having an argument map. So, let's workshop our own arguments. I want you to think about premises supporting this claim. So, as you know, today, for those of you in the UK, today is a UCU, a union strike day, and many university staff are on strike, including me. I'm doing this as a teach out, which means I'm not at university, I'm in my home, and I want you to learn these ideas, but I am not attending university because I'm striking. So I want you to come up with an argument to support the claim that university staff should go on strike. Now, if you don't believe that they should go on strike, it doesn't matter, because you need to learn to come up with claims to support arguments you believe in and arguments you don't, or claims you don't. So right now, let's see if anyone can put in the chat a premise, just the green boxes first, supporting this claim. Take your time, there is no rush, we have time. What premise would support the claim that university staff should go on strike? Staff have no job security, therefore university staff should go on strike. So Shazia, I wouldn't put the if, because that takes it away from being an argument. It's a complicated reason why. Just say staff are not treated respectfully by university, therefore. Underpaid, okay, etc., etc. Okay, terms and conditions are eroding and need protecting. Thanks, Nicola. Solidarity with the union. Okay, now I want you to provide me with a counter argument. Why should university staff not go on strike? A counter argument. Just waiting. Okay, great. Eartha has said, but strikes are not very effective. Sarah has said, but you work under fair conditions. Helen has said, student education suffers. Lindsay said, because they have a duty to their students. This is fantastic. So what you're doing here is you're throwing everything onto the page. It'll have an impact on students' learning. Universities have limited income. What you're doing is structuring an argument. And it might be that with your counter argument, you come up with a rebuttal. And so you conclude the same claim. Or you might decide that actually the counter arguments are strong enough that actually you think that university staff should not go on strike. But what you've done is you've developed a quality, complex argument with all of the different sides. So you can do this for anything. You can approach this for any part of your university. I recently had a very, very important meeting where I was asking for someone very senior to support me in something, a bit confidential, so I can't talk about what. Beforehand, I had done my own argument map. I knew what I was asking, my claim, and I had the 3 reasons that would support that claim. This is not a tool for students, it's a tool for everyone. It's a tool in the workplace. In fact, a lot of people are saying, please write a version of the book for the workplace. You can use this beyond university. Remember the book, Becoming a Critical Thinker, for your university studies and beyond. And we're seeing people start to use this really effectively in the workplace as well. There's a lot of practice in the book itself, but also in the online tools, which comes with the book. There is more resources as well that you can find at other places to keep practicing your argument skills. Because I want to show you my thoughts, I'm going to give you briefly at 3:05 my argument for going on strike. Feel free to critique it. That's what we're here for. And then after that, we'll be moving on to questions. So make sure you keep in your mind what questions you have or anything you'd like to share. But here is my argument. University staff should go on strike to force action. That's my claim. Here's my claim. Here's my premises, the reasons. In real terms, university pay has dropped 25% since 2009. On average, academics work about 2 unpaid days per week. Therefore, higher education is at risk of losing quality staff, affecting student outcomes. Therefore, we need action to protect higher education in the UK. Therefore, university staff should go on strike to force action. Before I go on, I'm going to provide some counter arguments, very similar to the ones you've provided. I wonder if anyone can tell me what's missing from what we've got on the screen so far. Any thoughts? I'm going to turn to my webinar chat. See if anyone would like to point out something that's missing from this. Maybe think about the chapter headings of this book. Evidence, Lindsay, thank you. Sources, evidence, Erta as well. How do you know I'm telling you the truth? How do you know this is accurate? In particular, those bottom 2 premises, in the real terms, university pay has dropped by 25%, and on average, academic work 2 unpaid days per week. Is that true? Is it accurate? How do we know? So when you're developing your arguments, you have to be very, very careful about making sure your premises, your reasons, are supported by evidence wherever you can. In fact, higher education is at risk of losing quality staff, affecting student outcomes. A better, more persuasive premise there would be if I could say higher education is losing quality staff, affecting student outcomes. If I could provide evidence that we're actually losing staff, which I think we are, but I don't have evidence of that. I do have evidence of these 2 ones at the bottom though. That's 2 surveys and reports. However, I don't think that evidence is incredibly strong. I think it's good. I'm not saying it's wrong, but I think you could probably find more persuasive, rigorous evidence than the union's own reports. UCU is our union. So why do I say that? In the Strength of Evidence chapter, I talk about finding sources that do not have a vested interest in what they're reporting, like academic articles. We don't have a vested interest in the outcomes of our research typically, and they're peer reviewed. So much more of that in the Strength of Evidence chapter. I really recommend it to you. But let's throw in a counter argument. You say higher education is at risk of losing quality staff, affecting student outcomes, but student outcomes will be affected by missing lectures and tutorials. That's a counter argument to why we shouldn't go on strike. If the whole thing that we're worried about is student outcomes, then we shouldn't be on strike because we are affecting them. And the rebuttal that I would give you to that is outcomes are already being affected and will get worse. Therefore, we should go on strike. Now, it's not a perfect rebuttal. And if I'm honest, I agree with some of the points that you've made about a duty to our students. But what is stronger for me is the fact that we have to protect higher education in the UK. If I had more time, I'd go into this in much more detail. Think back to an hour and a half ago, about an hour and 10 minutes ago, and recall that signature exercise. Right hand or your dominant hand and then your non-dominant hand, and how weird that felt, how different, how hard, how difficult it felt. And think about now The first time you try and draw an argument map, and perhaps it'll feel difficult. Maybe you'll get it wrong. Maybe it won't make logical sense. And that can cause some students to think, I'm not good enough, I can't do it, I haven't been shown how exactly. What I want you to think about is that practicing every day, every single day, practicing while you're at university and beyond university is how you get good at doing something that's different. If I practiced with my left hand every day, I guarantee you in 6 months' time, I'd be better at it. Critical thinking is not a how-to guide. It's not a simple hour-and-a-half seminar that makes you able to do it. It's a whole life. In fact, I find that sometimes I get better at critical thinking every day. Some of the ideas you've come up with in the chat have made me think differently about things. I'm still learning. I'm 40-something years old, and I'm still getting better at critical thinking. There's no secret. There's no thing that no one happens to have told you yet. There's no perfect guide. It is a long-term, lifelong process of thinking differently. And there is a section in the book where I talk about the things that you most need to become a critical thinker, the qualities and the traits. It's in the first part of the book, and I'm not even going to tell you what they are because I want you to go online and I want you to find out what they are. Thank you so much. I'm not going to say, are there any questions? I'm going to ask you all to ask me one question. That's the end of our slides. Type in the chat one question you want to ask me, and I'll turn my head now and I'll think about, and I'll try and answer the ones that come up. We have about 15 minutes, but I can go over a little bit. But if you do have to go, let me know. Shazia, I wish I had you as my teacher. Oh, that's very kind, Shazia. You, I hope I pronounced that right, you. Thinking critically often puts me in a state of conflict, which means I sometimes can't come to a clear claim because both sides can be logically right. How can I deal with it? Celebrate it. Celebrate it. If you are in a situation where you understand both sides of the argument really well, then you are in an amazing position. Well done. Sometimes that's really hard to get to. I think what you mean is with how can I deal with it? I don't know this. Well, I would like to be able to pronounce your name better. Q-U, I think. However, it's not about working out what the right answer is. It's about being able to support the claim you choose to make. I want to give you two examples. I have just been marking my student essays, and they were asked a specific question, and I teach this, so they have to answer based on a quality argument. The top marks, some of the people who got the top marks answered one side of the claim, and some of them answered the exact opposite, and they both got top marks. Why? Because I wasn't interested in who was right. There is no right. I was interested in their ability to build an argument, and in fact, I wanted them also to put in counter arguments. So if you know both sides of the argument, you've got a very easy way of providing a counter argument because you know what it already is. I will answer, though, to that question. You do want to be a little bit careful about what your marker is expecting of you. If this is being marked, if marks matter to you, you might want to be a bit careful about that. But ultimately, I would celebrate that if you were able to do that. I want to get to as many questions as possible. So, okay, Mary A, thank you. I am preparing to go to uni as the first person in my family, and this has been really helpful. I can't wait to, oh, it's not a question, Mary A. Well, thank you anyway. I actually talk about what we call as first geners at the start of one of the chapters. So the chapters at the start, they have a thing called an academic's view, and it's my view on the topic of that chapter. And one of them is about first geners, and I think first geners are exceptional. Both my parents were first geners, and you'll see in the dedication to my book, not one of my grandparents finished high school. In fact, 3 out of the 4 didn't start high school because they had to go out and work for the family. So I have a really soft spot in my heart for people who are doing this for the first time, and I think that's amazing. Okay, let's get back to some questions. Noaz Uzo, if I link evidence with my perspective, will that be critical? Evidence is essential to support the premise or the reasons to make your claim persuasive. It's only critical if you're showing a logical consistency of your argument. So I don't love the word critical in critical thinking, if I'm honest. Critical makes it sound like it has to be bad or wrong, but critical thinking means seeing both sides. It means understanding and evaluating both sides. So the evidence is there to ensure that people are persuaded by or convinced by or believe something you're saying, and to show them that what you're saying is true. So it's not that the evidence makes things critical. Critical is about showing both sides of the argument or giving a reasoned, logical argument. I hope that's answered that question. Also, great. What is the importance of using therefore and because? Great question. So these are called claim indicators or claim indicators or premise indicators. These words are the links between the claim and the present. And the premise. I'll say that again. These words are the link between the claim and the premise, the reason. If you don't include the link, you've just got two statements. Okay. Scotland will win the Rugby World Cup. I eat eggs for breakfast. There's no demonstration of how those two things are linked. To have an argument, you must show how they are linked. This is important, and I talk about this a lot in the quality of argument chapter. This is important for a couple of reasons. One is, if someone is reading your work, for example, marking your work, you need to show them that you understand how it's linked. But the other one is that sometimes arguments work both ways. Okay, I could put an example in the book. I can't remember what it is now, but arguments work both ways. So the claim, you could say the claim, therefore the premise, or the premise, therefore the claim. And so the claim and premise could be flipped, and they could either be the reason. This is about deciding on what is causal, what's causing the claim. So it's really important that you include that so that you show how those two statements link together. I hope that's explained better, but again, that chapter will go into a lot more detail on that. Eartha, is there a limit for how complex or large an argument map can be? No, no limit at all. Argument maps have been used by military organizations, by governments, by all sorts, intelligence organizations. It can be enormous. You go on to say, would you recommend trying to fit my whole PhD thesis into one argument map, or is that an unproductive struggle? I would say that the work you might do to fit everything into an argument map will always be useful. But I would not assume that the aim of the exercise is to come out with a perfect argument map, because there might be too much, okay? So if you're doing work to try and get it into an argument map and that helps your brain to work out what's going on or to identify problems, great. But I wouldn't do it with the aim of having a perfect argument map. Argument maps are tools. Think of a toolbox at home. If you've got hammers and nails at home, that's it. That's useful to putting a picture up on the wall, but the point of the exercise was putting a picture up on the wall. The point of this exercise is developing a quality argument. Where an argument map helps you, that's great, but sometimes you can put it away and you've still got a quality argument. How do I deal with conspiracy theorist students who reject scientific fact? So I talk about what is a fact and what is a factual claim and what is an opinion and what is prejudice in the strength of evidence chapter. I think that the best way I have heard recently is to require them to come up with an argument supporting both sides of the claim. So for example, all my students, I don't teach the course anymore, sadly, but when I used to teach this course, the first exercise was that students had to make a claim about, for example, McDonald's are doing enough to address environmental issues. And then they had to provide both sides of that argument. So they had to argue why McDonald's was doing enough with an argument and with reasons and premises and evidence, and also argue why they were not doing enough. And this was to get them to see that there's always a more complex story. I hope that's helped, Marguerite. I think that would be a very difficult situation to be in with people who reject fact. Sarah, do you have an example of where you used critical thinking and it was really helpful? Well, the example I gave the other day was to go into this senior meeting with my argument map in my hand, not literally, it was in my head. And so anytime that anyone tried to give a counter argument to why I shouldn't be able to do what I wanted to do, I had my rebuttal ready. I knew what they were going to say. And I said, yes, however, this is how we will address that. And so I was able to anticipate those things. I'll give you another example, though, that I give to some students, job interviews. So I've done many job interviews myself. Well, I've done some myself. I've been in the same job for 15 years now, but I've done many job interviews for others. And too often people just waffle with an answer. Tell me about why you are a team player. Well, I started working at McDonald's and we had a team there. I moved on to this other organization and we did teamwork training. And then I did this, although we didn't have team. And so just the waffle. You want to provide, every time they ask a question in a job interview, you want to provide an argument for why you should get the job. Tell me about a time you worked in a team. Well, there are 3 things that I have done in my career so far, examples of when I've worked in a team, which show I'm a good team worker. The first one is I did teamwork training at my previous job, blah, 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 right? So you develop an argument within your job interview to convince people that you're the right person. Karen, I have your book and I couldn't get past the critical thinking part because every time I did the map, I felt it was going wrong. Oh, good. That's not a question again. Okay, great. First of all, it's not going wrong because you're learning every single time. You know that apocryphal story of Thomas Edison, who had, was it something like hundreds of different failed light bulbs before he actually invented a real one that worked? What we stop when we get something wrong. Stopping. Just keep going. Okay, thank you. Okay, Mary, how can we relate critical thinking with critical reading and writing? So my reading and writing chapters go into this in a lot of detail. Basically, thinking is about understanding, remember the definition of critical thinking, understanding and evaluating the arguments. So when you're reading critically, you're trying to understand and evaluate the arguments in what you're reading, okay? And so you're trying to look at what the author is arguing, to look at both sides of that. I hope that's answered. I wanted to get to more questions as a brief answer. Nicola, I find myself in the exact position of critic over writer. Is it only practice that will help me improve? I don't think it's practice. I think it is belief, Nicola. I think it's you having faith in yourself and saying, I know I can do this. I'm just going to write. Some people use the Pomodoro technique, set a timer on your phone and just write for 20 minutes. I'll give you one tip though. I think this is why it's better to write and not type. Anytime I type, I automatically become a critic. In fact, sometimes I become a copy editor, fixing spelling mistakes. That stops my flow of thinking. So I think it's more about belief and faith. In fact, I talk about having faith in yourself in the thinking chapter. I'm going to keep scrolling. If anyone behind the scenes wants to jump in and tell me the key questions that are coming up, please feel free to do so. But I will just
there are a couple questions.
Yes, go. Tell me.
A bit earlier. So here's one that says, when writing an argument, do you then back up your thoughts with literature or the other way around?
Oh, good question. So that you can do it both ways. So, and I keep saying this, I explain this specifically in the book. So there are 2 ways to come up with an argument. One way is to come up with your argument and go searching for evidence to support you. That's okay, and that's fine. Another way, though, is to do the reading of the evidence and let the argument fall out of that. Let the argument fall out of that and see what claim it leads to. So, and those are 2 different techniques, and they can be useful in different contexts. And I talk about the context in which each is useful. Sometimes you kind of already know the answer. You kind of already know what the claim is. And so you know enough about the topic that you can kind of almost write the premises and then make sure you go and get the evidence to support those. Sometimes you're very new to something and you've just got no idea, right? Is democracy or communism or communism, is capitalism or communism a better approach for social welfare outcomes? Wow, I mean, I'm jumping to capitalism because I live in a capitalist society, but I've never lived in a communist society. I've really got no idea for social welfare outcomes about what the answer to that question is or what claim I should make. So I'll go and read up on those things and use that reading to inform my claim. So both ways are certainly possible and better in different contexts.
Right. There's another
thank
one
you.
here, that says, should you make try to use at least 3 premises for an argument?
No, there is no number of premises that works. So in fact, and you'll remember back to the complex argument maps we had, I had something there called supporting premises. And I showed you those when I had it's called a chained premise. So you've got a number of premises. It all depends on lots of factors. The length of what you're trying to do. Are you trying to write a short answer to an essay question, an exam question? Or are you trying to write a 3,000 word essay? Or are you writing a 100,000 word PhD? So it depends on length. It depends on the complexity of the argument. Is there one clear premise that you want to really explore in lots of detail? Or would you like to come up with lots of different reasons to be convincing, to show that there's lots of reasons that people should accept the claim? I understand as students that you want an easy answer. You want me to say you should always have 3 premises to support the claim. It doesn't work that way. It depends on the claim, depends on the context, and also it can depend on the premises as well. So apologies for the non-answer, but the answer is you have to decide. And in fact, part of critical thinking is you deciding. I sometimes get feedback from my students, critique from my students saying the essay question wasn't clear enough of exactly what I should do. And my answer is, yeah, intentionally, because we often, first of all, I want to see what you do with it. I want your creativity. I've got no specific answer in mind. I want to see what you do with it. But also, once you get out into the workplace, your boss doesn't say necessarily, I want you to do this exact thing in this exact way and then come and present it to me. Your boss might say, I need an answer to this question. Go and work out how you're going to do it. So I think that you need to sort of get out of that idea of there being a perfect way to approach something. I'll keep scrolling, but Siddharth, keep coming to me because there's a lot of stuff happening here.
Right, well, there's one more here then.
Thank you.
What if the evidence supporting the premises later changed to refute the argument? Ooh.
Yes, good. Okay. There is a famous quote from, I think it's from Winston Churchill, although maybe I'm attributing it to him, which is something like, I think it was a woman talking to Winston Churchill. Oh, look, I can't remember. But the quote is this: when the facts change, I change my mind. What do you do, sir? If you are making an argument with a specific premise or a specific claim, and then new evidence comes, or you find new evidence, then you can change your claim. There are very few right and wrong answers in this world. What there are is quality arguments supporting claims, quality premises or logical arguments supporting a claim. I actually do reference this in the book. If you find that you've made a claim in an essay and then something changes, the facts change. I think in the book I talk about, say you say that I think that students should not use, this is the example I have in the book, students at primary school should not be taught technology because they need to focus on reading, writing and maths, right? That's a claim, right? That's an argument. And then you find out that there's evidence to show that students who use technology get better at reading, writing and maths. Then you're going to change the claim. Okay, that's fine. That's what we do all the time. And getting out of that mentality of what's the right answer is really important. The right answer may be contextually right for a short period of time, but it will change. I hope that has helped. Please, whoever asked that question, please comment if you would like more clarity. I feel like we're at past. I know a number of people will need to go, Siddharth. So do we want to end there and let people stick around if they've got specific questions after? Is that what you'd like to do?
Yeah, I think we've got about 2 more questions. Maybe we can just ask those and then we can just end it, I guess, because
yes, let's do
2
that.
questions in here. So one of them is, what is the best way to stop my head from telling me I'm wrong?
I don't know, but if you work it out, come and tell me. We are, as a human race, terrible. We're very, very critical of ourselves. I'm 40-something. I've got 4 university degrees. I know, too many. It's crazy. I'm pretty successful. I've got a good job. I've done a lot of pretty good things. I've written a book with OUP, and I'll still sit here and feel some sense of imposter syndrome because I'm not good enough to be in certain rooms or giving arguments to certain people. I think that the first step is to say that out loud. I talk about this myself because I think the other step is to hear other people say it themselves as well. You will never be great at everything, and you may never be great at anything. That doesn't mean you won't be good at things. And I think our society reveres people who are exceptional, but there's so few of them. Most of us, me included, are muddling along and working on stuff that we're good at and enjoying it. We're not great. Ironically, I'm actually not a great critical thinking scholar. And I actually think, if you indulge with me for a moment, that might be why my book has been effective for a lot of students. Because I think the great critical thinking scholars struggle to explain it to people who are starting on the journey. There was a lovely phrase I heard once on radio, which is, to teach one thing, you must know 2 things, which I love. I think the great people, great critical thinking scholars, perhaps know 10 things. And so they can't just teach one thing anymore because they're so good at it. They can't remember a time when they weren't good at it. I have an example of an economics professor once who was brilliant. I mean, brilliant. But he just couldn't teach us because he couldn't remember what it was to not understand the simple stuff. So I wonder if my book is working, is helping people, because I remember what it's like to not get argument maps right all the time. So be kind to yourself. You may not be the most exceptional person ever, and that's okay. You don't have to be the smartest person in the room. You probably never will be, and that's okay. And use tools like the book or whatever other tools you're using to just get better, but also try and enjoy it. I find that if I enjoy something, I actually get better at it without putting pressure on myself to get better. I hope that answer's helped a little bit. I think there was one last question, Siddharth.
Yes.
I hope you've saved a good one for last.
Right. It's actually a pretty good question. So will using this argument link for each learning outcome not sound repetitive in an essay?
Oh, good question. Okay. So in the clarity of communication chapter, I talk about writing an essay, because clarity of communication is about communicating your argument. And there's 2 parts to that essay. There's a part about spoken communication, oral presentations, and written communication, essays. Now, that is different to the chapters on speaking and writing. Remember, those are different chapters, because speaking and writing chapters are about speaking to think and writing to think inputs. In the clarity of communication chapter, I talk about oral presentations, speaking as an output of thinking, and essay writing, essays as an output, a written output of thinking. I do provide an essay framework, an essay template. Now, I was in 2 minds about whether to do that. There are people, and I talk about them in the book, I'm self-critical, okay? I come up with the counter arguments in my own book. People who would say you should not provide students with a template because there is no one way of writing an essay, and providing a template detracts from that. I talk about that argument in the book. And I had to make a decision, and I decided to include a template, not because I think that template will make you a brilliant writer. It probably won't. But because I know that many of you struggle with how to structure a paragraph to explain your premise and how it links to your claim. And one of the key challenges is not sounding repetitive and not sounding mechanical. formulaic. And so I talk about that. So yes, that is a challenge. However, my argument would be that I would rather you clearly communicate your argument in your essay so that people understand what you're saying, rather than you be the most beautiful writer in the world. If you want to be the most beautiful writer, creative writing is for you. If you can be the most beautiful writer while communicating your argument, great. But if you do just sound a bit repetitive, but the reader gets what you're saying, the reader understands what your argument is, I think that's okay. And also, it's certainly okay for when you first start this process, because you won't be brilliant at the start, and you'll get better and you'll get better and you'll get better. I think that's us coming to a close. We've done very well. We've only kept you a little bit extra, but did the John Smith team want to say something? Shall I stop sharing my slides or keep them there?
Oh, you can keep it up.
Okay.
Basically just wanted to say thank you very much, Sarah. That was amazing. I think we both learned quite a bit sitting here and listening to you as well. Both of us have loads of scribbles. My thing is completely full of signatures now with my left hand. So I'll let you know how that goes. But yeah, once again, thank you so much for the workshop. I think it was very helpful and a lot of people are going to get a lot out of it. Just to everyone out there, again, if you've missed any of it, don't worry. It's going to be on our YouTube page. So we'll be sending you links to all that and a copy of Sarah's slides afterwards. So yeah, just keep an eye out for your emails and you'll definitely get all the links. Thank you once again, Sarah. And yeah, hopefully we'll see you again.
Thank you so much, everyone. And thank you for so much input on the chat. It's been fantastic.
Cheers.